Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. How are you doing this morning?
Quite well, thank you. Fall starting to show up here in lovely California, which just means it's, 75 instead of 90. So it's pretty lovely.
I bet. I'll say, yeah, it hasn't been lovely here on the East Coast. We've had nothing but rain for a while. So today's one of the first nice days. You actually look outside, you're like, oh, the sun.
Nice.
There's this big ball of fire in the sky. This is good. We can actually enjoy a little warmth, maybe. But then I looked and it's going to be a high of 65, and I thought, yeah, fall is upon us. It is upon us.
Fall's upon you. Have your leaves fallen? Have you had that giant, massive leaf fall that I always see when I'm in DC that time of year?
No.
That
usually the leaves start changing. It's interesting. My wife's from West Virginia, and you can literally see the layers where here everything will still be green. You drive a little further north and the temperature will drop 10 degrees and suddenly you have a little bit of color. You drive a little bit more into the mountains and you have a lot of color. And then you start seeing some where the leaves have fallen. And it's really interesting sort of to see that gradual change, because here in DC, we don't really get cold enough until, mid, sometimes even late October.
Yeah, I was in the Great Smokies in fall before the pandemic at some point. And since those are such big mountains, you see like the bottom was still green.
Yep.
And then you go up a little bit and you start to get some color, and then you get some color, and then you get the leaves off. Like you look at one mountain and you'll see that whole progression of the season right there in front of you. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's really neat to see that. Well, today we are going to be covering a topic that, let's just say, there's not a whole lot of new research out there. There's a lot of refresher information. And I kind of wanted to dive into this because, a lot of times you and I have a lot of conjecture and want to say, okay, how can we push, this topic to be, to make sure we're doing the right things and that what we're doing is going to get our clients to their ultimate goal. And what we're going to be talking about today is osteoporosis.
Which has, if any of you have ever looked at the statistics for this, something like 1 in 3 women, 1 in 5 men over the age of, I think, 50, depends on what statistics you read, have osteoporosis. Not even osteopenia, but actual osteoporosis. And that number has been going up, by the way, with the lack of activity, with the changes in diet. That's not getting better. And depending on where you are in the world, in some places it's even worse. And a lot of Asian countries, it's even higher than that.
Absolutely.
So osteoporosis is really, it's a thing. It's a genuine public health issue. And we want to do the best we can to work with it with movement.
And something to think about that most people don't, at least in the fitness industry, what I find is most people don't think about men having osteoporosis and how common it is, especially as testosterone drops. And now we have a lot more supplementation for testosterone. And I think areas that are a little bit more cosmopolitan, you're going to have a little bit more of that. People they go to the doctor more regularly. So getting checked for their testosterone, or even going to the doctor and saying, look, I think I'm suffering from low testosterone, and getting treated for that can help. And can help reverse it, especially if you get it when you're, younger. But there's a lot of the nation who, especially with men, they just don't go to the doctor very often.
No, and I also think that they aren't screened for it. They're not encouraged to be screened for it, right? I mean, they're always talking about, if you're a woman over a certain age and you're postmenopausal, go get screened. Like you hear that all the time. It's just a public health message. I've never heard them say, like, if you're a man, you should get screened. I've never seen that.
I'm 52. They have never once looked at me and suggested that I ever get tested for that. Now, I'm an active male, I look like I'm in good shape and all of that, so I can see why they would think, well, he's athletic, he probably doesn't need to. But I bet if I asked my dad, who's 75, I bet he's never had a DEXA scan.
I don't know any of the men that I know that age who have.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of men who are between 50 and 70, and none of them that I know have had a DEXA scan or even been suggested to them.
Yeah.
So, and that is 20%. I
Yeah.
mean, they say 20% of men. That's not an inconsiderable number.
No, that's not. That's huge. That's huge. So yeah, so we're going to dive into that a little bit today and probably raise, like we always do, a few more questions than necessarily answers, but at least get your brain thinking as to what you should be doing or what you shouldn't be doing. And when I started doing the research for this week, I realized, wow, there's a lot more to it than just, oh, do weight-bearing exercise. Why? Because you need to do weight-bearing exercise. And we know the physics behind that, and we'll go over that in a minute. But there are other reasons that exercise is a vital component to osteoporosis and the treatment of osteoporosis. So, I just found it fascinating. So it's good for me to even do, the research going, oh, yeah, that's right. Little reminder.
And from a Pilates perspective, to sort of jump right in on that, one of the things about particularly mat Pilates is generally not like, according to one article, roughly 75% of the exercises in a traditional mat Pilates class are not really the best thing for osteoporosis.
Yeah.
Because they involve flexion and loaded flexion, that kind of thing. But on the other hand, the other key features of Pilates, especially done in more of a private setting or in an apparatus setting, posture, core strength, balance, coordination, all those pieces are critical. So again, whether you are building bone or not, in terms of whatever movement experience you're having, the fact that you're working on strength, you're working on balance, you're working on flexibility, you're working on posture,
Yep.
you're working on keeping the body moving in a comfortable way, those are all really critical pieces to keep somebody from having an osteoporotic fracture or having other long-term health issues from it.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's no question that exercise in general helps with osteoporosis, just in general.
Yep.
Let's start at the beginning. Okay, let's start at the beginning and go over, first of all, what are the risk factors? Who has who are we going to see that tends to have or may have osteoporosis, and what may be some of the causes of it? We'll start there before we get into more of the methodology behind treatment and management.
Yep.
So we see it in fitness a lot more with lighter weight individuals, women.
Yep. Smaller bone structure.
Exactly. Smaller bone structure, lighter weight. The ones that I see that are the most worried about it are the ones that you would almost refer to as frail when they get into their 60s. You wouldn't think of them necessarily as athletic. Probably didn't have a weight condition.
Right.
Not always, though. Not always. I've had a couple who came in who were, let's just say, larger women and on the plus side. And when they said that they had osteoporosis, it almost shocked me because I expected they're obviously putting more weight through their joints. And what I found kind of interesting, and we can talk about this to greater detail, was the fact that adipose tissue has only been shown in the hip to help osteoporosis, but not in the spine.
Well, that makes sense in a way.
Yeah, so
there's not that much weight around the spine.
Yeah,
and you're not even carrying that much weight in your upper body, even if you're larger, because your weight is going to be through your shoulders and your arms, as opposed to your hips and your legs, right?
Yep, exactly. So you think of our entire torso when we have a little larger mass is going to be on those hips, whereas, like you said, they measure what. L3, well, it's only what's above that that's really compressing down on it that's increasing that force. So it just, when I read that, I said, oh, that kind of made sense that, exercise was much better for the spine than, just being larger and having more gravitational force.
So
go ahead.
So with that in mind, there are also some differences in terms of generally, and again, this relates a lot to just body shape and structure. There are also some differences in terms of like Asian people of Asian descent tend to be a little higher likelihood of having osteoporosis. People who have African blood in them somewhere, African genetics in them somewhere, tend to be a little bit less likely. So in a very mild way, darker skin tends to go with less osteoporosis. Lighter skin, more osteoporosis. And that's just, whether that's genetics, whether that's the melanin that happens in the skin and the vitamin D and all that. There's a lot of debate around that, but just statistically, those seem to go together. Now, whether that's activity-based,
right?
Like who knows why that is? There's can be a lot of reasons for it that don't have anything to do with genetics or race specifically. But those are just things that they show up in the statistics.
It's interesting because my brain immediately went to a whole lot of different factors, as a lot of Asian people we know tend to be lighter weight, smaller bone structure. So immediately that was my first thought. Whereas, African American, depending on where they're from, what part of Africa their heritage is from, genetically speaking, they may have just throughout their genetics been more active, throughout their, genetic, lineage. That's the word I'm looking for. So I was just thinking, interesting that it could be that. The melanin, immediately I jumped on because vitamin D is so important in the regulation of calcium.
Mm-hmm.
In the body,
right.
and the synthesization, say that 3 times fast, of, the calcium in the body and absorption and things. So I thought, I do wonder if that's part of it. Fascinating, sort of to look at those things.
Mm-hmm. The other thing too, and I have to bring this up when we start talking about this is not just an older person's disease. So we often think about it like if you see somebody over a certain age, at least I know in my practice, when I see a woman over a certain age, I think, have they been tested for osteoporosis? Have they been screened? It's just an automatic thing that I think in my head. And I'll often ask them, have you done that? I worked a lot at Center for Sports Medicine in the dance medicine division. And so we had a lot of young women who were dancers, gymnasts, ice skaters, high-level athletes of different kinds. And a lot of the body needs or the body standards for those particular things are very lean bodies. Oftentimes people are nutritionally compromised because of that, or there's eating disorders in the way. And I had more than one client who had osteoporosis, actively diagnosed osteoporosis in their 30s, who had been a dancer. One was a dancer, one was an ice skater, and had really had eating disorders through their entire adolescence and growing up period. So that's just something to be aware of as you're working with any kind of clients in those circumstances.
Yeah,
because nobody's going to look for osteoporosis for them.
Yeah,
right, and it's something it's good to know.
And I'm sure I think it's referred to as the athletic triad of amenorrhea, osteoporosis, eating disorder. Those go hand in hand, and the groups you mentioned absolutely is the ones you're going to see it in, where having that lean body ideal for their sport in gymnastics, in long distance running, where they're working out so extreme, not eating enough, trying to get as lean as humanly possible, and dance. And we're going to see that. We're going to see they're going to be, nutritionally compromised, as well as just, not taking in anywhere near what they need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just something to be aware of. Like if you're looking at a client, don't assume just because they're 20 or 30 or 40 that isn't an issue. Don't assume it is either, but just, be aware that it could be, and based on their history.
And what's interesting, going into that, I'm going to bring up dance primarily and gymnastics, where I've worked with people who have had eating disorders, who have been active in both of those, who became amenorrheic, who developed at least osteopenia. One was in full-blown osteoporosis. You would think with the amount of jumping that a gymnast does and landing and that shock that goes through the bones, that these are people who, why would they ever develop osteoporosis? Because weight-bearing exercise, that's what you need to do. But you can see it's not only weight-bearing exercise, because these people are doing that practically for a living. They're doing it hours and hours every day, landing on those bones, yet they are osteoporotic or have the potential to be without the nutrients. So you need a combination of, they say hormones, proper nutrition, and proper exercise.
Exactly. All of them need to be put together.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So let's talk about the bones. Let's go into a little bit of anatomy here. And what exactly is going on with someone who has osteoporosis, and what is the theories behind, weight-bearing exercise and all of that. So if you want to jump in to start, and I'll
So when we think about bones, we often picture a bone that has a solid outside. Like you think about a femur bone, or you think about George O'Keeffe's skull sitting on the desert floor. And it always looks very smooth on the outside. And bones are smooth on the outside. That's the cortical bone, and that's where our muscles attach, etc. But inside of that, so not on the outside of the bone, but on the inside of the bone, the structure is more sponge-like. They call it trabecular bone. And it really is kind of spongy. There's a lot of holes in it. And that's to produce a lightness. If our bones were literally solid, we would weigh so much we couldn't lift ourselves up and move around over the world.
Exactly.
So the holes, the sponginess, is designed to make our bones lighter. And one thing about those holes, or those bridges, those little spongy look, is that the fibers that hold that together, the calcified fibers that hold that together, are created based on the stress that is put on the bones. So in other words, you've got all these, basically they're called trabeculi, but they're kind of like bridges and arches and little circles and rings and stuff. And those calcify, and the thickness of the calcification depends on how much force is put through that particular area. So the bone is constantly remodeling based on what is happening to it, what forces are being put through it, either by gravity or also by muscular tension.
And in physiology,
it's not just gravity.
We refer to that as Wolff's Law.
Exactly.
That whatever forces are applied to the bone, it's going to respond and remodel in kind in order to absorb those forces in the future.
And a good example of that is if you look at any bone, you'll see some big bumps on bones, like, for instance, the lesser trochanter of the femur, if those are familiar with that, or the elbow, the olecranon process, right? Those are big bumps on the bones, and they're big bumps on the bones because muscles are pulling on them all the time. And that creates thicker bone there because of that pressure from the muscles that are stimulating that bone to grow.
And we also see that people who have chronic ankle sprains, where the ligament has been pulled so many times that you can actually see a calcification where the ligament attaches on the bone. You can see that bone actually grows. You can see it on bodybuilders' shoulders who have those little triangle pyramids on their shoulders, that the ligament's been pulled for so many times that it literally is pulling that bone. And over course of years and years and years, the bone does grow and responds to that.
Right, it calcifies.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one other thing about that, and you mentioned this a little bit before we got on this call, is there are some things that will make you build better bone and things that will make you build less better bone. And one of the key things that will be disruptive of building bone is smoking.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Smoking is one of those things that, smoking in general for the human body is one of those things. You're introducing a toxin that is not supposed to be there. Just in general, it's not supposed to be there. And when I was reading through some of this, there are about 150 toxins in cigarettes. And that leads to an increase in estrogen destroying enzymes and producing more free radicals. So that right there creates an environment where you're not, the estrogen is actually helping to, that's one of the hormones that helps regulation of calcium, regulation of bone absorption, and osteocyte, osteoblasts, creating more bone, and osteocytes not destroying the bone as much. So you have these toxins that are literally, you're introducing it on a regular basis that's breaking your body down. And we're talking about osteoporosis, it's really inhibiting bone growth.
One of the things they say with bone fractures is that fractures can take up to twice as long to heal in a smoker versus a non-smoker.
That's huge.
Just any bone fracture, which is huge.
Yeah.
It can take 6 weeks, right? It's going to take 12 weeks. That's a whole different story.
Yeah, when I had my shoulder worked on, they said 8 weeks before they resected the bone a little bit. So they said it's going to be 8 weeks before it's fully healed. Could you imagine that going to 16 weeks?
Seriously.
We're talking about a quarter of the year that I wouldn't have been allowed to even use my shoulder, my arm, because they wanted me pretty much to not use it as much as possible. So that's a long time to not use the arm, the leg, whatever it is, because as we talked about, the atrophy that occurs in the muscles at that time and how much longer it's going to take to get that size strength back is huge. And you're just doubling it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So smoking is an issue. Sometimes genetics could be an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing too is we build bone. Apparently, this is always a little bit disturbing every time I read this, but we build most of our bone mass by the time we're essentially in our 20s.
Yes.
So whatever bone mass we build during our childhood, our adolescence, and our early active years, if you will, are a lot of what will then lead us through the rest of our life.
Yep.
So when you think about kids these days spending not enough time moving, a lot of time on their computers or whatever, they're not doing the bone building work that will prevent osteoporosis in the distant future.
What's
And that's the
interesting,
other thing.
yeah, a study came out, 10 years ago or so, that looked at soccer players. Now, I'm going to go back generations, okay? My parents' generation. For women, they never played sports. They had home ec instead of PE. They were told that that's where they should be, not out playing games, not out playing sports. So they didn't have any of that. Now let's go into the 70s, 80s, where women's sports starts to become a little bit more, participated upon in schools and whatnot. And you're seeing a lot more women playing soccer, especially through the 90s. We're seeing soccer became huge. Well, they've shown that the amount of force that you're doing on your body when you're at that pubescent age, when you are an adolescent, is going to dictate where you're going to be much later in life. So they are much less likely, even if they're a smaller individual, they are much less likely to develop osteoporosis because of that time they spent on the field. And I find that fascinating. But now we may be reversing that again with as much screen time as people are having, and more people are spending time on their computers and less time even out playing sports. So I'm wondering if, we sort of peaked in that, those sports, and it might be coming down again. I don't know. But I just found that fascinating that, you look at the generations. My parents' generation, much more likely to develop osteoporosis. But millennials and Gen Z may have a little less of that because they participate in a lot more sporting activities.
Right, and we'll see, right? It's going to take a while for all of those genetic factors and those time factors, demographic factors to move us forward, and to see where they actually end up when they're in that period. In terms of women too, the key time for osteoporosis to develop is as their estrogen declines around menopause. And the 5 to 10 years after menopause are when there's the most rapid loss of bone density typically. So that's typically when people should get screened. Ideally, they get screened before menopause, just to see what the baseline is for them. And then once they start to go through menopause, getting screened again to make sure that things are, just to see if things are progressing, in what way they are progressing, if they are.
And you just mentioned something that I tell all of my clients this as they are getting older. I prefer to get a baseline on any test that a doctor is going to do at a young age.
Yep.
Okay. My family, there's a little bit of history of colorectal cancer and things like that. So you know what? Opportunity came up in my early 40s to have a colonoscopy. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Because I want to have the before picture when I'm young, when I'm healthy, when there's nothing going on, because I want a comparison down the road.
Yeah.
And I tell women who, some women that I know haven't had, haven't been in for a breast exam, a mammogram, and they're in their early 30s or mid 30s. And I'm thinking, now's the time. Let's get the before picture, because the more you can compare it to, the better. And for the DEXA scan, absolutely, because if they're already starting out with a drop, maybe they start out and they're already osteopenic before menopause even
before
comes
the hormones
close.
Change.
So then you'll be watching, you'll see, oh, okay, that's something we need to watch out for. And also maybe that's a person who might want to think differently about hormone replacement therapy rather than someone who just blows it off. It's like, I don't need that. They may take it a little more seriously, that might help them.
Right.
In that sense.
Absolutely.
And we're not physicians, so we can't, guide them in that direction, but it's something that they can talk with their doctor about.
Absolutely. And that's our role, right? Is just some things to think about. Here's
Yep.
some advice for you. You might want to go talk to your doctor about XYZ. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we've got hormones, we've got, now diet is not within our scope particularly, but diet obviously has a huge effect on somebody's bone density and how they work with it. All of my clients who have had osteoporosis, I make sure that they're working with a nutritional person, a nutritionist of some kind. Again, that's not my area of expertise. I'm really clear on that. And there is so much conflicting, non-accurate information out there on the internet, but I really suggest they work with a professional who works with people with osteoporosis, specifically to work on getting their diet organized for that particular situation. Because it's critical. Things like diet sodas, they know are depleting of calcium.
Yep.
And I mean, that's the big one that I know of. And then there's lots of other just dietary habits that are not good for you.
Well, if we just think about the amount of processed food we eat nowadays compared to whole foods, I was once talking with a client, basically said, okay, think about what your grandparents ate. They ate a lot more whole foods versus what do we eat? And my son loves like protein bars and things because they're easy. He can just grab one and eat it on the bus on the way to school and things. It's like, yeah, boy, but you may want to try, whole foods as well. You may want to make sure you have something else. Because while these supplements and some processed foods may include, some vitamin A, some vitamin, D or whatever, vitamin C, it's not the same as getting nutrient-rich food. And we need a wide variety of foods in our diet, just in general. And the less processed, the better, because a lot of times through processing, we're stripping a lot of those minerals out, including calcium.
Yes, and we're losing the synergy of all the different pieces of that food that go together to oftentimes help you be better able to absorb those nutrients or use those nutrients efficiently.
Yeah.
And we know that, the American diet is generally horrific. So there's not a lot going on there. And that is why I always recommend, talking to a nutritionist and trying to get your diet in order if osteoporosis is a concern.
Something
now
that I want to cover just with calcium as well. I don't know if you remember 15, 20 years ago, these calcium chews became very popular. And people were, because they tasted pretty decent. They basically like Tootsie Rolls, but they were filled with calcium. And I knew clients who were eating 3, 4, 5 of them a day. And because I need the calcium, so they were eating these. And what we have to remind ourselves is one of the silent killers of women when it comes to heart disease is calcium buildup within the arterial walls. Not necessarily plaque, but calcium buildup. There's a huge report that was actually done and published in the Washington Post probably 20 years ago now that talked about this. And I saw it in a couple of clients' parents who suffered heart attacks, yet their cholesterol was incredibly low. But when tested for calcium, it was very high. So that's why I think talking to a nutritionist is very important, as well as not just relying on supplementation, taking these supplements, that have tons and tons of calcium all the time, but getting it from regular food also can be very beneficial.
Yeah,
especially
absolutely.
If heart disease is in your family. Talk to your doctor, talk to a nutritionist, make sure you're getting enough, but not overdosing on it, because there may be some consequences down the road for people who might choose that route. Just something to think about.
Right. Yeah. Nice. I hadn't heard that. That's interesting.
Yeah. I just had a client remind me of it about a week ago when she had hers tested and her calcium was a little elevated. And her doctor said, okay, let's watch this now because heart disease is in her family and she's in her 70s. So I was like, oh yeah, that's right. It just was one of those things that reminded me. I said, yep, we should mention that too. Just something to keep in the back of our heads.
Yeah, and that's so individual. And that's the other thing too, is anything you read is generally works for a particular part of the population.
Yep.
People metabolize calcium differently depending on who you are and where you're from and all that stuff.
Yep.
And being able to customize it is a really important thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you somebody who does put calcium into your blood vessels? Or are you not?
Yep.
Because those are going to be just some different genetic predispositions there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. So we've talked about bone density. We've talked about what it is. We talked a bit about some factors, some risk factors, both age, activity, smoking, diet, lots of different things. Let's talk about movement.
Yes. Because that's what
and
really,
what we do in terms of exercise.
yeah, that's what we do. That's what we
That's
do.
what we do.
And traditionally, all you would hear is, we need weight bearing, which makes sense because not only are you trying to build up the trabeculi within the bone, but you're also trying to grow the cortical bone on the outside. You're trying to thicken the walls. And the more that you're going to load that bone axially, which is, compression of that bone, you're going to build that bone a little bit denser on the outside, which can be very, very good. And that helps for bone strength in general. So that's what we've always heard is just increase weight-bearing exercise.
Now, I have a caveat on that.
Uh-huh.
And that is that the body adapts to whatever it's used to. Because I have one client who she was a runner, very thin, very, very lean gal. She was a runner and she ran 3 to 5 miles, 3 to 4 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
This is the kicker for the last 15 years.
Yep.
So her bones had completely accommodated to that level of activity.
Absolutely.
And were no longer being stimulated to change or to grow or to get denser.
And that is a great caveat to remember.
Yeah, and a couple of other things about that. There's another gal that I worked with who was actually a weightlifter. She's a competitive weightlifter. But again, she was not in the building her weight lift up time. She just was doing regular weightlifting, more or less in the way that she had been doing it for the last 10 years or so. She was under 60 at this point. And she also ended up with osteoporosis. Mm-hmm. So she's doing a lot of weight bearing, a lot of weightlifting, a lot of stimulating the bones through weightlifting, and ended up with osteoporosis anyway.
Yep.
Again, because the body had accommodated to it. I want to say one other thing about the first gal I was saying about the runner. One other issue for her was she had chronic migraines. And so she had a diet that was very specific. In her case, there was a lot of specific dietary things that kept her migraines down, but also may have limited her calcium intake for her. And there was a point in her life where she was had some irritable bowel stuff and that kind of thing, and she was on steroids for a while.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah. And so for her, she was this was a triple threat, not in a good way. She had some dietary issues, and then she was on steroids habitually for a period of time to deal with this autoimmune issue she had.
Yep.
And that also is that and thyroid replacement, both of those will severely decrease calcium uptake and can be contribute to osteoporosis. So she was one of those people where it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many things happening here that we have to work on.
I had a woman who was a triathlete who came to me at 41, 42, and she had had both hips replaced already. Now, I've seen that in dancers. Okay, I've had a couple dancers who have had their hips replaced by the time they're in their 40s. Rare, but occasional. I thought, what did you do as a triathlete? Because you think that's not just doing one thing. You've got 3 different activities. Yes, it's in the sagittal plane, but you're loading your body in so many different ways. What happened? And she was on prednisone, a dose of prednisone, because she had, what was it? She had an autoimmune issue. And she was on prednisone for the last 20 years, and it broke down the bones in her hips.
Yeah.
And eventually all the pounding that she was doing, even though she was doing what we would tell them to do, weight bearing, she still wore the joint down and wore the bone down to the point that it was risk of fracture while she was doing her activity. It was basically hollow, according to the x-rays. So this is another case where you got to look at the whole picture and really not just hear the word osteoporosis and think, okay, weight bearing. Look at the whole picture. Is there a contributing factor that's leading to that it could be? And I think it's another thing that we need to talk about. As we said before, it's not just exercise, but it's a combination. I've had some people who have come to me who are osteopenia, and it's like, all I need is exercise. All I need is exercise. It's like, look, it's going to help. But hormone replacement, proper nutrition, calcium supplementation, medications of different types, and exercise. And sometimes it takes a combination of a couple, if not multiple, of those things together to really solve the problem. And it all depends on the person. Everybody's individual.
One of the things, too, that Yes. So again, taking the whole view, and again, we're only part of that view, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're the movement. We're the movement part of that.
Yep.
With this one guy I was talking about who was the runner, um, she was interesting to work with because basically we did Pilates, we did footwork, we did feet and straps, we did all fours, and my approach to her was okay. So she's getting in gravity weight bearing in running.
Mm-hmm.
She's getting that. She's getting that impact and that load. And clearly it's not doing enough. So my thought was, and my approach was, I need to be stimulating those bones in ways that they are not being stimulated now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So in other words, we did a lot of things with her hips and turn out and turn in. She's getting different stimulation in through the hip. We did, and we'll talk about this more specifically in a moment, but we did some specific work for the spine, a lot of extension work on the spine, a lot of upper body work. We did a lot of upper body weight bearing, all kinds of planks and push-ups and all fours exercises to get weight going through the body.
Yep.
And force going through the body in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And in her case, she made significant progress in about 6 months of doing basically a Pilates program.
Mm-hmm.
Where I just really focused on trying to get stimulation through those muscles, not necessarily all weight bearing, because, it's resistance, but it's not necessarily weight bearing,
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of different angles through all the joints that I could think of.
Yep. And I think it's important also to note that the choices you made were things that were unfamiliar. So they were new.
That's it. That's the thing. They were new. It was like I was trying to stimulate her legs and her whole body in ways that her body had not been stimulated before.
Right.
Exactly.
So it wasn't just the same thing that she had been doing. If she went to someone at, down the street at a 24-hour fitness or something and was doing lots of lunges and squats and things of that nature, it may not have done the same, may not have been as productive as hitting it in a totally different way.
Right, and that was my thought.
Yep.
I thought, well, I wasn't sure if it was going to make any difference because you never really know until you try something. But she was quite dedicated. She came in, I think she came in once a week, and she had a reformer at home, so she would do her home program like twice a week as well. So she was doing a full 3 times a week. And after 6 months, she made significant gains in terms of her bone density.
Yep.
And again, this is completely, guys, just so you know, this is just one empirical evidence moment. Okay, one case study moment. This is not, your results may vary, as they say.
But something to think about is it involved movement. And that's what we're talking about. You loaded her spine, you loaded her body, you loaded her joints in a way that hadn't been done before in a completely unique way. So, and we've seen this with almost every type of activity. When you introduce a new activity that the body's not accustomed to, you see great gains at the beginning because your body has to figure out what's going on, sort of model the motion and learn the sequence, learn the motor pattern, learn all of that. So you're really engaging a lot more neurologically at the beginning, than you would 3 years from, down the road when your body is accustomed to it. So introducing new things is helpful.
Right, you wake it up.
Yeah.
I mean, I always say you wake it up. It's like a lot of times I find with my Pilates clients that all I'm doing is giving them something unfamiliar, and that alone stimulates. You see their little brain light up, their eyes open up wide, they stop talking, they're paying attention, right? Because their whole system is stimulated, right? They're like, I'm doing something new, I'm not sure what I'm doing, I'm paying attention.
Yep.
And that was the same thing to do mentally, and also in her case to have her body pay attention and go, oh, well, why am I getting stimulated from that angle? I better respond. Yeah.
Now, think about this. When it comes to exercise and movement, really what we're doing is a lot of different things. Again, when I was doing the research about this, it was like, okay, why does exercise work? Well, we just said weight-bearing exercise definitely helps, but just movement in general can cause so many different things with the body. Hormone effect on regulating estrogen, which can change glucocorticosteroid levels, promoting the proliferation of more estrogens, which help protect the bone, and help the bones to grow. These things happen just with exercise in general. So if you're doing nothing and you just start exercising at all, you can actually see a positive benefit just by moving. Which I think needs to be stated, just get out there and move for people who haven't, is going to help.
Circulation,
Yeah,
right? Circulation 101. I mean, every single thing we read says if you just get your blood moving every day, that will make a difference in your health on every level, whether it's cardiovascular, whether it's your neurological health, whether it's, dementia decreasing, all those things. So yeah, and it's true in terms of bone health as well. Also, movement in terms of positive movement patterns. When I'm thinking about your environment, your personal training environment,
yep,
being upright, looking at loading in different angles, loading in different directions, working on balance, working on lifting, working on posture, working on all those pieces,
everything.
all those. Because what happens with osteoporosis? Where do people end up? Right? If you think about them
Oh,
posturally,
yep,
right? You've got typically more kyphosis. You might have kyphosis and lordosis, depending. Things seem to go in different ways. Losing range of motion in the hips, forward head,
round shoulders,
all
all
of
of
which
that.
can lead, all of which can lead to pain and discomfort just from being in a funky posture all the time,
Yep.
right? So then getting that stronger, working on the mobility of the shoulders, working on the mobility perhaps of the hips to get yourself upright, strengthening the areas that are going to support that better posture, all those things, right? All those can also make a difference just in terms of comfort level and functional level.
And for those who do have osteoporosis of the spine, the one thing that they want you to avoid is flexion in general. And we can talk about that in a minute because I'm not 100% sold on that. But you said it earlier, work extension. Teach them
Yep.
extension, load their spine differently, get the muscles posteriorly to support and hold them upright better so they're not sort of hanging on those bones. And for some people who do have fractures of the thoracic vertebrae themselves, by teaching them extension and getting more thoracic extension, teaching them proper rotation and movement, you're taking pressure off of that.
Absolutely. And I'm going to refine that even a little bit more. So we've talked about Wolff's law, right? Bones build by being stimulated by gravity and or load. If you don't move the spine, you don't load the spine,
Yes.
period. Right? If you're not doing something to get those muscles to fire along those, I'm particularly thinking of the erector spinae and the deep spinal muscles,
Yep.
then you're not getting stimulation into the bones to help to increase bone density within the spine.
Yep.
And one thing I want to say there is sometimes real extension is not possible if somebody's very kyphotic.
Sure.
But there are a lot of ways to load the spine without even moving into extension. Like if I'm just in all fours and I'm lifting an arm and I'm lifting a leg, like I lift a leg, that's loading my spine.
Yep.
If I'm doing like a wall push-up, just hands on the wall and I'm leaning forward, that's going to load my spine to some extent.
Yep.
So there's a lot of ways to get load into that area without doing, loaded flexion or even rotation or lateral flexion. So just some things to think about there in terms of getting the tension into the spine.
Yep. And I'll put someone over a ball and just get them into an isometric where you just have them with their hands on the ground, straight body, feet on the ground, ball underneath them, and then just lightly take, one hand up, just lightly take it off the ground before you begin lifting it and things like that. Then do the other. Eventually you take a hand off, you reach it forward, you can eventually do both. And you don't have to go into a spinal extension. Just holding the isometric at parallel with the ground is going to begin to stimulate those fibers.
Exactly.
And that's really what we're talking about.
Exactly. And even if you add, so just to take this at one step, so if you're in that position like that, all fours or over the ball, or I do this sometimes on the chair in Pilates land, and you take a hand off the pedal, for example, in the chair, take a hand off the floor, that's going to load the spine asymmetrically. Right, as opposed to both hands on the floor. And just that is going to, again, stimulate all those little muscle fibers around the spine to get a little more firing going, get a little more stimulation into the bones. So there's lots of ways to get that stimulation into the spine fairly simply and quite safely is really my key on that one.
Something else I wanted to bring up. There's two other factors that I add into my work with people who are osteoporotic. And the first is what I call shock. When we do something like a jump, for instance, or even when you're running, when your heel strikes the ground, there is a shock of reverberation from the ground through the long bones all the way up through the body. And that's actually been proven that that helps to build that cortical bone. It helps to thicken the walls of the long bones, which is what we really want to do. But
Right.
not everybody, we're not going to take a frail 65-year-old and say, okay, you're going to run now, or let's do
Right. Or jump on the
plyometrics.
trampoline.
Right.
Right. Box
But,
jumps.
right. But there are ways that we can still cause that shock. I have a particular leg press machine that I use that I can de-weight their body to 5 pounds. So it puts them in a squatted position. It's all by rubber resistance. It's called the shuttle MVP. And you can de-weight them to almost no weight and have them do little jumps. So I can take them 5 pounds. So every time they're landing, they're getting a little bit of that reverberation through their body. And something I teach them for homework is I say, okay, I want you to go up into a calf raise, up on your tippy toes, and then drop down onto your heels. And that shock reverberation through the body. And I'll say, do that 10 times. I said, don't hurt yourself. I don't want you to be in pain, but just see how that landing over and over again causes that shock. And we've seen a lot of success with that by introducing this other type of work besides just weight bearing, introducing more of that impact.
We do the same thing with the jump board.
Exactly.
In the Pilates environment on the reformer, we just, light, put it really light. And typically I'll start with like a running in place. Right. So they're just getting that. So and then eventually it'll be like just a light jumping from foot to foot.
Yep.
And it just, again, make it as light as you need to. This is not full weight bearing. And that's the idea, as we're taking it way, way down from full weight bearing. It might be on a blue. For those of you who know Pilates reformers, it might be on a relatively moderate weight.
Yep.
And just letting them have some of that impact.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that impact, that shock, and the ability to absorb shock is also incredibly important. So that's something to think about.
I'll also do something like wall jumps. So it's like you're doing a wall plank, right? Your hands are on the wall, and you just bend the elbows, and then you're like you're pushing off the wall. So I'll also do a little bit of, or I'll do it on the foot bar too, on the reformer, kind of in an all fours position with the hands on the foot bar, pushing off the foot bar, again, very lightly. So that shock isn't just coming from below, which is more common and more typical of somebody who's walking around, but it's also coming from above and coming from the upper body.
Well,
again, lightly, but just give you that different stimulation of the system.
And something to think about. Just because the DEXA scan only does 2 parts of your body doesn't mean you don't have osteoporosis in other bones in your body. It's a pretty systemic issue. So by doing that push off of the wall, the landing, you're getting it through the forearm, you're getting it through the humerus, you're getting it through the upper body as well. And if you think about someone who's going to fall, not only are you worried about their hip, you're worried about their wrist, their elbow, their forearm, their shoulder.
Right.
We're also worried about the upper body because what's going to catch them? Their upper body when they land.
Right.
So we need to think about that as well. So I love the fact that you do those little wall push-up plyometric, wall jumps, because that does add that. That adds that shock, which you're not going to get any other way. I mean, not too many people, do, push-ups with claps in between when they're in their 60s. It's a little
if
challenging.
They can do that, right. And if they can do that, there may be other issues that we don't have to think about. But,
exactly. Exactly. The other type of training that I've introduced to people is vibration. There's all sorts of different things. We have a power plate. I use it for a lot of different things. For a long time, they thought of it as a panacea for osteoporosis, that, oh my gosh, it increases. What they suggest is that it increases gravitational force on the body, because when you're standing on the ground, you've got 1G. You get on this and it's pushing up against you, and depending on the amplitude, depending on how hard it's pushing you, it can increase the amount of gravitational force. Now, they gave a whole lot of numbers, which I'm not going to say I believe it. If you guys want, you can do all that research yourself. But does it help? I will say yes. We've put a number of clients through that sort of a routine, and, not more than about 15 to 20 minutes per session would ever be spent on the vibration machine. But things like a squat, not standing fully extended. If you stand with your joints extended, it rattles your brain. It's not comfortable, and it's one of those contraindications. But having them do squats and lunges, putting them on all fours so they're getting it through their upper extremity as well. So if I'm going to have them do a bird dog or an oppositional raise, I could do it on the ground. Why not do it here where they're going to get some of that vibration? So really, it's just finding exercises that we would have done off of that machine, do it on it. It actually has helped. I had one person I'm thinking of, she went from being deep into osteoporosis to being osteopenic within a year. And we did it every week. Now, again, that's one person. She was very, very consistent. I'm not saying it's going to work on everybody, and it's a very expensive machine, but a lot of gyms now have these machines. So it's something that if you have access to it, why not use it? Because, at least in my experience, it does seem to work.
Nice. At one point with Bounce Body, we were working with the power plate people, and we ended up going to their headquarters and playing with their equipment and reviewing all the research that they had on power plates and what they were used for. Mm-hmm. And I can't say at that point, and this was probably at least 10 years ago, it might have been 15, that the research was very robust.
No, it wasn't conclusive at all.
No, there were a very small amount of people, and a lot of them quit. And anyway, the studies, I wouldn't say, were very robust at all. But that was interesting. And it's interesting that you've had that experience now that you've worked with it a bit, of having one client who really made significant changes that way, significant gains. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
And it's another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, exactly.
And my thought is always, whenever I have any client in front of me, I want the biggest toolbox possible and I don't use that on everybody. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I don't use it on everybody who has osteoporosis. But if it's for a specific person and there's a specific reason, I'll absolutely do it. And a lot of times it's just, let's see how it works. Because if I spend 5 minutes on that and it seems to help, why not do it?
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. So what we're talking about here is ways to stimulate the body in new ways, right? So whether it's a power plate or a vibration machine, which definitely will stimulate the body in new ways, working through the upper body rather than the lower body, adding shock. I think all those are ways to just, again, get the body to respond. We're trying to get the bones to respond one way or the other and wake them up, wake up that metabolic process, essentially. The other thing, too, though, is all the work that we do on, again, posture, mobility, et cetera. What I find with a lot of my clients with osteoporosis, especially if they've started to get postural issues with that, or I have to work a lot on, for example, mobility of the chest.
Yes.
Right? The chest just seems to round forward. They get more kyphotic in their thoracic spine. And I just need to work on opening up the chest, bringing the shoulder blades back. Also, a lot of tightness in the front of the hips. So I do a lot of just basic anterior hip stretches and psoas stretches and that kind of thing in ways that are comfortable for them. And then a ton of core work, just a ton of all fours based. I generally am not moving the spine in the core work. So I'm not doing a crunch. I'm not doing the series of 5 in the Pilates repertoire, but I may be doing a lot of all fours work. On the reformer, I may be doing a lot of, I actually love the suspension trainers for this, whether it's Bodhi or TRX or whatever, because as soon as you lean out of gravity, just going forward, the whole core muscular system goes bing and starts to fire up without having to risk a flexion of the spine or even mobility of the spine. It just gets those muscles to start to fire. So I love that. Also, again, from the Pilates environment or the Bounce Body environment, the core line is fantastic.
Yes.
You've got multiple vectors coming in different ways. You are weight bearing. You can adjust a lot of the resistance and get both mobility and strength in the same area. So a lot of ways to play with getting that going.
You mentioned the suspension trainer. Something else that I've done with that is you can begin to teach them a little bit of jumping with that. Very light, because they can use their upper body a little bit to help control. And when I say jumping, these people are not trying to slam dunk a basketball.
Right.
We're
talking a light prance.
Barely leaving the ground. If they get an inch, it may feel like a mile to them. But it's just so that when they land, they are dissipating that energy, they're absorbing that force, but they're also getting a little bit of that impact as they're coming down. So they're getting that shock through their bones. So I find that can be really good, and the suspension trainer is a fantastic place to do that with.
It creates a little suspension. I mean, they call it a suspension trainer, which is a different meaning of suspension, but it really does take the body weight off.
Yep.
And again, whenever I'm working with actually almost anybody who I'm trying to start to do jumping with. I always start with like alternating one leg at a time before I go to two legs. It just always seems to work a little better for them coordination wise. And also in that case, it's like, just a light, like start with a run and you're not even quite jumping and you just gradually build that up into a little bit of a jump from foot to foot and then start to do two legs. Now, one other thing that we haven't mentioned as much, which I want to bring up also. So there's focusing on the spine and the upper body. There's also focusing on multiple angles of the hip.
Yes.
So, and I do this for any osteoporotic client I've gotten. I do a ton of work with the hips in different angles because I want to stimulate that acetabulum and that force coming through from the femur, through the pelvis up to the spine in as many ways as I can.
Yep.
I also do this a lot with anybody who is pre-hip replacement or heading towards hip replacement because of hip issues. And I may have to take the weight way down. I may have to do it like virtually, very low weight bearing, but parallel, turned out, turned in, extension, flexion, abduction, adduction. I really work on a lot of hip stimulation in whatever way they can tolerate.
Yep. No, hitting it from all these different varying vectors and angles is incredibly important. And also remember that we talked about bones remodeling. How many muscles attach to the greater trochanter?
A lot.
A ton. And wouldn't it just make sense to hit every muscle that attaches to that area because it's only going to help stimulate bone growth at the site? Now, granted, it's not the neck of the femur, but it's still in that general area. That's going to help build a little bit more bone in that area. So I agree completely. I think that's fantastic. Great idea.
It's also because so much of typically in movement and typically in fitness and even in Pilates, we think a lot about sagittal bilateral exercises.
Yep.
Squats, lunges aren't bilateral, but lunges, walking, running, things in that plane, which only move the femur in roughly flexion and extension. Obviously, there's some deviations there, but flexion and extension in the acetabulum. And we really, especially as people age, we do not work on like abduction, adduction, just sidewalks, right? We don't really work on things like that. And that works on balance. So it makes them less likely to fall should they run into trouble. And also works on strength and stimulation of all the muscles of the area and of the bones as well. And the joint too, for that matter.
Yep. Excellent. Excellent. Something I wanted to bring up that I think we, just in general, especially in the fitness world, and I'm not sure how it is in Pilates land, but retesting. I think a lot of people are really, really good at doing the first assessment, but then are they as good at testing down the road, doing reassessments? Now, every workout, you're technically reassessing where they are, but now we actually have an actual medical test that they're doing. They're doing a DEXA scan. If someone tells me that they're osteopenic or osteoporotic, I want a copy. I want it in their chart.
Yeah.
And when they have it again next year, I want that copy. Mainly to see, is it working? Is what we're doing working? Because if it's not, change what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that's the only way that we're going to know. Because we can't, we don't have x-ray eyes. We can't see if their bones are growing. But if the test, if their DEXA goes up, then we're like, hey, all right, we're on the right track, I think. Or if it flatlines or it goes down a little bit, it might be, okay, maybe it's time to introduce a nutritionist. Maybe it's time to change the exercises or increase the amount of whatever weight bearing, whatever it is. Or think about, different medications. We need to sort of retest and reevaluate based on those results.
I think two points that you just made, one of which is it's very easy for us to get complacent. I see it all the time with Pilates teachers, all the time with personal trainers. We kind of start with our assessment, we get them going, and then we just kind of keep moving and take each day as it comes and don't necessarily look back and go, are we achieving the goals that you want to achieve? Whether it's bone density or it's mobility in your hips or whatever, or you want to be a better tennis player, whatever the goals are. Like, are we actually achieving those goals? And that's really our report card, right? Are we actually doing our job well? Are we getting the results we want to get?
100%.
And that for me really separates the the better practitioners from the less better practitioners, put it
Yep.
that way. Right? Like, yes, we're actually getting the results we want. We're working you towards your goals or our goals, whatever they are, and you're making progress. Or you're not. And if you're not, then it's time to go, what do we have to do now?
Yep.
Send it back to the doctor. Maybe they need a medication. Maybe they're just not ever doing their homework and they have a 10-hour day desk job.
Yep.
Think about, you're in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure a lot of your guys, especially during like campaign season, are not exactly staying physically active. And in here, I'm in California in tech world, which is the same thing.
Yep.
It's like these people are at their computers 12 hours a day and then they go home and play games all night.
Yep.
And that's not going to help any of their situations, really.
No, compliance and consistency are two things that we have to work on with our clients, or else they're never going to get better. That's, proven time and time again. But I really wanted to reiterate, because we all get into that habit of, okay, they're happy, I'm happy. The workouts are doing great. We're on the right track. Are we really? Let's make sure.
Right.
Let's test it out and see. And this is the easiest test, because we don't have to do anything. We just let them go to their doctor and then get the test and look. And if we look, we say, oh, it's working or it's not working.
Yep.
But at the same time, we got to take a little bit of responsibility too, that if what we've programmed for them isn't working as well as we think, having that DEXA scan, they can hold our feet to the fire too.
Exactly. It's just accountability, right?
100%. 100%. And again, if they're compliant, if they're doing their work and they're being consistent and it's not working the way we think it should, okay, we need to change things up.
Yeah. One other little fine point that I want to bring up, I had some clients who had fairly complex DEXA scans. So they really came back going, my right hip is osteoporotic, my left hip is fine.
Yeah.
My spine is fine.
Yep.
Or some combination of things. And those are always interesting to me too. It's like, okay, so if I know their spine is fine, because sometimes it is, then that doesn't mean that I need to avoid things like loaded flexion. I've got more leeway to really work on the spine. And so, the screening DEXAs, the screening scans typically just do the wrist, which is fine, but that doesn't really tell you about the hips or the spine. So if somebody does have a screening thing with their wrist and they know that they're somewhere in the scale, I say, hey, why don't you go get a full DEXA scan so that we know exactly where the osteoporosis is and isn't?
Yep.
Because that's really changed how I worked with people once I had that information. It's like, oh, well, we got to work on your hips. Like, that's what we've got to work on like crazy. Your spine, we can do anything we want with. Or, oh, your spine is where I've really got to focus. Your hips, I don't have to worry about. They're fine. So it's also important to know that those things can help to guide your programming a little bit more.
And also, in general, it comes back to movement. We got to get these clients to move. I mentioned a few weeks ago on the podcast about a client who got the diagnosis of osteoporosis and immediately became a robot. Didn't move her spine at all. And this is someone who is cycling miles and miles a weekend, rollerblading, doing all sorts of things. And all of a sudden, her world shut down. She got very small, locked it in a little box. She didn't turn from her spine. She wouldn't bend over from her spine. I'm not allowed to bend over ever again. Like, really? How the heck are you getting in and out of your car? How are you getting out of bed? There needs to be a realism at the same time. Our doctors, they want to keep us as safe as possible, but there can be a fatalism approach with this, or a fatalistic approach where you put it in their mind, you don't ever do this again, and suddenly that fear takes over.
This brings up two things, one of which is maintaining functional capabilities with osteoporosis.
Yes.
Like, how do you put on your shoes? How do you get in your car?
Yep.
How do you do the things you need to do? And the second thing is the psychological component.
Yeah.
More than one of the teachers that I've had going through the Pilates teacher training program that I've run, two of them I can think of specifically found out they were osteoporotic in the middle of the training. So, we'd gone through Mat 1, they'd been doing rollovers, and we're getting into reformer, and suddenly they're diagnosed not just with osteopenia, but with full-blown osteoporosis. And trying to tell them, who had been taking, I mean, both these were women who had been taking Pilates for years, had done everything, full advanced repertoire, roll ups, roll downs, shoulder stands, the whole deal, for 4 or 5 years, that they couldn't do that anymore. And in fact, they couldn't do a good chunk of what they had been doing up till the day before.
Right.
Was devastating and really, really hard for them to deal with emotionally and for me to navigate. And really where I had to come to, because, guys, if you hadn't figured this out, the challenge of osteoporosis is you don't know it's a problem until it's a problem.
Exactly.
Right? Like they can be completely fine one day. They can, like one of my clients literally turned over or leaned over, rotated to pull something out of a file drawer and fractured her 5th rib, or her 12th rib, just from rotating and pulling something out. And you don't know when those vertebrae are going to fracture, if they're going to. So that's one of those challenges. And I really had to say to them, I said, look, when you're under my care, when you're in my studio, I have to limit these things. And I can give you lots of other things to do, and I can modify like mad, and you can still have a good workout, but I will not watch you do a short spine on the roll up on the reformer. I will not have you do that while I can see you. Because if you fracture here, that's not good for you. It's not good for me.
Yep.
Like if you do this on your own, if you're off, doing a reformer at home, that's between you and your own reformer. But I can't see you doing that.
Yep.
And that was tough for both of those women. We had a lot of conversations about it and a lot of tears, actually.
I bet.
In the process.
I bet. For me, a lot of times I've talked to physical therapists about this. And for the most part, a lot of them have told me, look, you got to keep them safe. That's the most important thing. Keep them safe, but get them to move. And again, teach them how to put on their shoes. You're going to have to flex from your spine. You're going to have to in life. So the trick is loaded or unloaded. We don't want to load it. So in general, when you're bending over to tie your shoe or something like that, okay, you're not doing something depending on how large you are and all sorts of different components, but you've been doing it for a long time and getting in and out of your car. We want to make it as safe as possible. We want to put you in the safest position as possible, but we also need to teach you to move normally.
Right. So for me, it's like, how loaded? Like, what exactly does loaded flexion mean? Now, guys, let me take this.
Great point.
I'm going to walk this back a minute, because a lot of this loaded flexion, what are we talking about, right? It's like lying on the ground and doing a curl up, or doing a roll down in Pilates, or certainly doing a short spine, roll up and roll down on the reformer. Those are all loaded flexion. You've got more than, got a lot of load going into the spine in those exercises. There was a study a long time ago, which it didn't have it wasn't that big a study, but it's a study a lot of this is based on, where it took a group of people, had them do a number of different exercises over a period of time, and saw which ones were most likely to lead to fracture. And flexion, and worse, flexion with rotation, loaded flexion and loaded flexion with rotation were the worst culprits in terms of causing a fracture of the spine. Yep. Just to be clear, that's what all these precautions are based on, is kind of this study and then that study moving forward. So then I think, okay, well, what is, how much load is load? Mm-hmm. Right? If I'm leaning down to put on my shoes, okay, that's my upper body is loaded, right? My upper body weight is putting a little load through my spine, but it's not a lot. It's not like I'm picking up a 40-pound bag of dog food, mm-hmm. right? Which is a whole different thing than putting on my shoe. So someone just gets into that, like, relatively, mm-hmm. relatively, what am I doing? And to your point, how are you going to put on your shoes? How are you going to put on your pants? How are you going to get down to the toilet? How are you going to get in and out of bed? How are you going to get in and out of your car? And managing to figure out ways to do those that are as safe as possible.
Yeah.
Without, to your point, creating a robot, because that client has to move.
Yes.
Ordinary life is going to, and if they don't ever move, what happens? You lose the stimulation of the muscles against the bone, and you're not going to improve your bone mass.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the other thing.
Yeah. So there's a fine line to walk, and there's a lot of gray areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For me, it's about finding safe movement, keeping them as safe as possible when they are doing it, I love to do thoracic rotation for these clients in a safe environment where they are, in an upright position where they're not going to be doing a cross crunch or something that's going to really involve a lot of rotation that's weighted, and I'm a big proponent of staying away from, flexion and rotation just in general, but in extension, doing things that are going to stimulate rotation, that are going to allow the spine to move properly, always seems to work. And it seems to, get their body moving in a very positive way.
Yep.
And to me, that's the important thing, getting them into extension, getting them into some rotation, teaching them that their spine is not their enemy, that they can still move.
Right. And that they just need to focus on different things.
Yes.
Instead of putting all your work, and again, this comes from the Pilates lens, instead of putting all your work on getting your abdominals to fire in a curl, which is a big feature of many Pilates situations, you're going to try to get that same stimulation and that same excitement out of moving your spine in extension.
Yep.
Or in sort of unloaded rotation. I always think of that as standing and just rotating my spine in standing. So it's, I'm not that loaded. I'm just rotating and trying to maintain that mobility of the spine, that stimulation of the spine.
So again, chances are, for the average person listening, we've answered a lot of questions, but we've probably stimulated a few questions at the same time.
Yes.
As we normally do. And that's just it. This podcast is not the end all be all. We're not trying to solve the world's problems here. We're trying to stimulate thought. We're trying to bring up some points to hopefully help you with clients that have osteoporosis. But also at the same time, you're probably going to be thinking about this for a few days and think, I wonder how I should do this. I wonder what I should do there. So in that sense, I think it's been a success that we've, allowed you to think differently about the whole process instead of just thinking that it is purely, weight-bearing exercise.
We've got a little, hopefully some thought bombs, we call them, or little thought seeds going in there. And this is a complex topic, and there really is not, and there's not settled research in terms of this works, this doesn't work. Every time I read the literature, I'm like, I sort of throw up my hands and go, okay, well, I'm going to keep them moving in as comfortable a way as I can, trying to avoid dangerous situations, but really keep them going. And that's not very satisfying in terms of a protocol, but that's a lot of where I always end up with clients and trying to help keep them functional.
And always remember, every client that's in front of you is different.
Absolutely.
So you can't look at a study and immediately say this is going to work on everybody. It may work for this person. This other person may only get 40% out of what you did with that other one that got 100%. So you know what? We modify, we adjust, we overcome, we adapt. So yeah, I think this was a great topic. We covered a lot of information.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of information. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to comment, question, come back. movingcombos@gmail.com is how you can get in touch with us. All of our socials, Moving Combos, at Twitter and on Instagram. And yeah, and next time we'll cover another topic and throw a few more thought bombs at you.
Look forward to seeing you guys soon.
All right, we'll see you later.